the book, The Federalist Papers, was basically a compilation of leaflets written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. The papers basically they compiled hundreds of years of theory of how a democracy works, and the plans for the Constitution basically lays out the ideology of what should be ratified. So these men, examine the sources they have and explain the reasoning to the people for the ratification of the Constitution. So common rebuttals or like the nation would have too much power. Hamilton explains in one article that by having three branches check on each other, the legislative, executive, and judicial, along with the state government, the separation of powers, then makes the power isn't that much power and everything's equal. So basically, these articles are 85 articles and they cover a variety of topics from each branch to what should be ratified, problems with the Articles of Confederation, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about a few of them. The supporters of the Constitution call themselves Federalists and label their opponents anti-Federalists. So authors, like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, they chose pseudoms of Roman statesmen, in this video about Publius, who was actually under the pen name Publius. So Hamilton initiated the project and announced the motive to convince readers that the safest course for your liberty, your dignity, and your happiness was to adopt the new plan of government. I quote, I frankly acknowledge my convictions, and I will freely lay before you the reasons on which they are founded. End quote. That was said by Hamilton, and it has a deep meaning. So basically, in all these 85 articles, he laid beside each and every single reason. He laid beside what the Constitution was to start with. So while he was doing that, on the other end, Brutus, uh, or the anti-federalists, they were getting ready for the rebuttals. Why we should stick with Articles of Confederation, the AOC, why they're better. They're more simpler. They give more power to the states. So they were doing their job over there. But moving forward to our first paper, I think this is a really important one just because it generalizes what happens. I feel this is an important direct quote from it. Quote, I propose in a series of papers to discuss the following particulars. The utility of the Union, that's the United States, to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve that Union, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed, to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of the Republican government, its analogy to your own state constitution, and lastly, the additional security which, in its adoption, will afford to the preservation of the species of government, to liberty, and to property. So basically, they're going to answer any and all objections that have been made or draw attention to any of the people, whether you're an anti-federalist or whether you just want to know more. They're going to answer your questions in these 85 articles. Originally, it was actually meant to be less than 85 articles, but in the end, it ended up being 85 articles. So when the people of America think of the rights they have, the powers they have, today we think, we the people of the United States of America, those are the first few words. We have these rights by birth, but if you go back to 1777, 1776, they really didn't have that many rights. You were just coming out of a war, ready to write a whole new constitution. The anti-federalists actually thought of this as monarchy, because if you think of it, you have a president sort of akin to a king in a way. So that's how Brutus thought, but I'm going to cover that later. Anyways, moving on. So when people are called upon to choose their rights, would they choose a government who has 13 states, and each state has a different constitution. And if you were to go to one state and say, do an action of some sort, you could be jailed. Where else in another state, if you did that same action, you would be okay. Like the common thing is, slavery. Slavery was banned later on in the North, but it wasn't in the South. So then you had to decide. It was like two different countries. So would you want 13 different countries, or would you want one sole country? That was the question. The Articles of Confederation laid out 13 different countries. At least that's what it interpreted. And the Constitution laid out one sole union. So that was a key difference between those two. So that's just a little backdrop. But going back to the book, and I'm just going to take a quick direct quote, which actually explains this pretty simply, from Federalist 4. Quote, leave America divided into 13, or, if you please, into 3 or 4 independent governments, end quote. So that's basically just summing up what I just said about having 13 or 2 different countries. And if one place was attacked, and this is stated in Federalist 4 if you want to have a read while I'm talking, but if an army from, say, England attacked, say, we're going to make Virginia, Carolina, that's one place, so VC, I'll call it. So if one state attacked VC, would New York be expected to help VC? They're two different countries, right? So is there the expectation to help? Well, with the Articles of Confederation, there's nothing of that sort. But as you get into the Union, you have the responsibility to help your neighboring state. And this is key when you're risking blood and money. And this is one, example. If we talk about the economy is totally different per state, but in the end, it's one central economy, one central power. So I just want to talk about Federalist 8 and 11 real quick. They're pretty much the same, so that's why I'm going to make them in one. So Federalist 8 and 11 basically state that states would overrun each other, they'd go against each other, they'd have massive, conflicts. There would also be 13 countries versus one country, and there would basically be no room for difference of opinion. You're having one place, there's no room for difference of opinion. There's no room for factions. And factions, you might think, well, the Democrats and Republicans agreed on something, that's great. But, factions are what makes us different, If I don't, you might be thinking that, hey, masks should be taken off. But if we don't have, factions, no one's going to know whether you want masks on or off. That's the key important of factions. So another key Federalist paper is Federalist number 10. So that basically states that the new government would be able to stop, control, or violence, caused by factions. And basically factions are a number of citizens who are united and motivated by some common cause or interest. So a group. So factions. In case you didn't know what a faction was, laying it out there for you. It would have a state government as well, and the Articles of Confederation have not been successful at that time by stopping politically moved factions. So at that time, factions that were politically moved, the government wasn't, very good at stopping those. But the new government would be. And factions, like I said, with the mask example, factions are natural because, I may agree on something, you may not, and that's society, and we have to accept it. Government should also have more of a say in property distribution to stop the interests of others. And, we can control a faction, right? A faction cannot get out of control. I get, there have been, January 6th. That went a little out of control. But we can control factions, as stated in Federalist 10. We can remove the reason for a faction. We can remove liberty, or rather give more liberty. We can do either or. And we can control the results. In the end, we have the power to do that. And the new government is a representative government. It's a direct democracy. If we had a direct democracy today, we would have not been able to control any factions or protect any personal property. And the articles were more of a direct democracy, while this is a republican democracy. And the government wouldn't be controlled by one faction. It would be controlled by the Whigs and all that. It would be controlled by multiple factions, and we'd have competing interests, and we'd turn them into laws for the common good of the country. Because the North has a different view, the South has a different view. We don't want just the North's view with one faction. We want two factions, three factions. That way we have the better good of the whole country. We see a big picture that way. And they make interests that are good. If the government has too much power, there's less representation. The Constitution was made proportionally equally. And honestly, Constitution, it considers when people were writing out the Constitution, they considered the obstacles that would come. Now, I've talked a good amount. I'm just going to talk about two more Federalist papers that I believe are really important. Okay, I lied there. I'm going to talk about three. But I'm going to go in order because they're sort of important. So Federalist 51, this is going to be real short. So basically, Federalist 51 was a paper that reviewed powers that were given, and it reduced security against foreign danger, regulation of intercourse with foreign nations, maintained harmony, and restrained states from doing injurious acts. So basically stated that, hey, if you have your country there, what are you going to do if someone attacks you? With a central power, we can have more power if someone attacks us in defense. And, the powers worked together. Now, if we go back to Federalist number 15, that one basically said the insufficiency of the AOC to preserve the Union, the material imperfections in the national system, and something has to happen to rescue the Union from, anarchy. And the Union at the last stage of national humiliation. If the Union, if the AOC were to go on for 5 more years, we would be laughed at by every country in the world. I guarantee you that. The Union must get rid of the articles to break the fatal charm, which, has seduced us for too long. Right. Federalist number 70 basically states out the main purpose: defense of the proposed executive power of the Constitution created by Article 2, which says the president only is limited to the commission officers of the armed forces, grant reprieve, or convene Congress in special sessions, receive ambassadors, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, wield the quote executive power, appoint cabinet officials, White House staff, and the Supreme Court justices. And the rest of the three powers are shared with Congress, Senate, and the judicial branch. So honestly, the executive doesn't have that much power. And that's stated in the Constitution. You can go in Constitution Article 2. That's one of the first things you'll find. A good government is characterized by executives' ability to enforce legislation and defend liberty. So when we have an election, right, the Constitution says, you have to be elected by the people. You can't elect yourself and be tyrannic and say, I want to change the Constitution. Because for the Constitution to be amended, you need 2/3 majority in Congress. And that's not going to happen if you're being tyrannic. So you could live those 4 years tyrannically and then be out of here, basically. Executives are essential. Brutus might not agree with this, or people anti-federalists might not agree with this, but executives are essential numbers of operations. Whether it be protecting the country from foreign attacks, steady the administration of the laws, protection of property, or security of liberty against assaults, ambition, factions, or anarchy. Right? Then components of the executive, and this goes into the branch and the president a little, but we need unity, we need the duration, we need the adequate provision for support, we need the competent powers. That all states out what you can and what you cannot do. So that's all stated out in Federalist 70 and the Constitution. Components that constitute safety in the Republican sense, that's dependent on the people, that's your responsibility. That's what I said with the election. If you're being tyrannic, you're not going to be elected again. Politicians and statesmen were celebrated for their views and like principles are in favor of a single executive and numerous legislator. That's where credibility comes in. And unity may be destroyed by vesting power in multiple magistrates of equal dignity and authority. It can also be destroyed by you know having it in one man. A president has a secretary of state, an attorney general. It's a whole team. So if we had it in one man, it would be tyrannic. So if we talk about the executive body, the size of it, when it's placed in a small number of men with common interests, it's more dangerous than if we put it in one man who, from the very circumstances of being alone, would be narrowly watched and suspected, and who cannot create a great mass of influence as he can as when he's associated with others. And America has much more to fear, from an easy combination than from the ambition of any single individual. So, in layman's terms, basically what I'm saying is if you get 10 people together, right, who say no masks, no masks, no masks, right, that's going to be really dangerous. And if you had one person in control who was saying, well, if we take masks off, COVID cases will rise, but masks can be suffocating. So, and everyone would be watching that one person. They'd be knowing what he was doing, so he'd be under pressure to do the right thing too. So, this is a little bit from Federalist 70. I just want to talk about a couple more things. Federalist 84 states that no state shall enter a treaty, alliance, or confederation. Because you're a state, if you enter a treaty, alliance, or confederation, you might secede from the Union. That was a danger, and with the AOT, you could do that. Texas, I believe, seceded at a time. The Southerners, with the Civil War, seceded at a time. With the Constitution, you cannot do that with any other state or country. You cannot lay any duties or imports unless approved by Congress. All laws, the state laws, must be necessary and proper, and all senators and representatives shall abide by and support the Constitution. So it's pretty simple, You better not you better not ruin our country. You can't collect any money, or like tax imports unless they're approved by Congress. All your state laws have to be proper. One thing that came out was the abortion law. That was a whole necessary and proper argument. And senators have to support the Constitution. This way, the Constitution is uplifted. That was all stated in Federalist 84. Now, if we go back to Federalist, I think that's it. I do want to talk about the Constitution. If I were to sum up the Constitution in one sentence, it would be with a central government that has more power of the states, they're better connected. That's pretty much the Constitution. The Constitution is pretty short, so I think it's a read that you can do on your own. But anyways, moving on. I do want to talk about Brutus. I know the book I was given was the Federalist Papers. I've explained about 6 papers to you, but I do want to talk about the other side and what could have happened. So basically, Brutus, which is the anti-federalist, they want to stick with the weak, Articles of Confederation. So with a new government, they had the fear of having tyranny. And the new government would not state intervention if the national government had implied powers. So basically, there was no limit of what the government could do. They could do whatever they want. And, the power to raise a military, and that destroys our rights and liberties. And these are all valid points. But you have to see these points are also in the Articles of Confederation. So technically, in a way, you have nothing to lose. But anyways, common good for the American people is not regarded when a large republic is put in place and there's a possible abuse of power. So I think this is the one where it actually makes sense. There's a possible abuse of power when, especially with the executive. If you look at I'm not going to get too political, but if we look at 2020 election, Clinton versus Trump, really look at Trump didn't do much, which is why he didn't get reelected. So I'm not going to get deep into politics, but when we have 50 states, we're one of the largest countries. When the abuse of power is put in, it could get tyrannical, but the Constitution stops that, and then we have another election. So yeah, as I just mentioned, a lot of the things written in the Federalist Papers were then implied in the Constitution. The Constitution was changed, and a lot of it we still use today. If you look at the election, that's a key example that I've given. But they're pretty relevant today. I mean, if you read them, everything in there nearly we still use today. And the only criticism I'd have is to the Federalist Papers was to make a little more in layman's terms, because it was a very deep read. I would like it to be a little more in layman's terms. That's just my idea. A couple other points that Brutus had were that people could lose their liberties and rights under the new government, which was actually false if you actually read the Constitution. And with the implied powers, which are basically like, they're not, implied powers are basically powers that are not written down, but you can imply that, hey, you know, we could do this because, like, it's reading between the lines, basically. It's possible for this to happen because it's best for the people, and it's possible. So that was basically what implied powers are. I think I'd have to do a whole other video just to explain implied powers. That's that. It would be more limited, if the people's power rights would be more limited. And liberty, especially if you look from 1776, if you're looking forward 200 years to 1976, people's, future, their liberty in the future could be compromised with. They could have less liberty than they do in 1776. And basically, those were the problems that Brutus had. And Federalists, they had an answer for everything, basically. I think it's a great read you could do. You should read the Federalist Papers. It's a great read. And I thank you for listening. See you next time.